actually is. I always believe that it's very, diligent to present truth, facts, and relevant information. Although we love the passion that we exude, it's really about becoming familiar with what actually is. So let's see. In signing this law, Obama, the Senate and Congress have essentially created exceptions to the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. This bill provides sweeping exceptions to laws that represent our most important rights as American citizens. Let's deal with the 5th Amendment. No citizen shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now the 14th. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and liberties of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, with this, American citizens can now be imprisoned indefinitely without a lawyer or court hearing. The NDAA essentially amends the Constitution. Who can be in prison without a trial? For life. Any American citizen who the military decides has committed a vaguely belligerent act, anyone who has been considered to be associated with those engaged in hostility against the United States, any government, present or future, can now imprison protesting citizens for life without trial. I'll take a moment to pause and say in 2009 the Department of Defense released a pamphlet where they classified protesting as low-level terrorism. It kind of gets a little creepy for those of us who gather around certain issues we're passionate about. Get back to the document. So, citizens can be in prison for life without trial under the new legislation, giving vague wording, no trial, and no opportunity to prove our innocence. The Constitution is in jeopardy. In general, Congress affirms that the authority of the President to use all necessary and appropriate force pursuant to the authorization for use of military force includes the authority for the armed forces of the United States to detain covered persons as described in different subsections who, under the disposition of law, commit or aid terrorist acts or harbor those responsible for those acts, or a person who has substantially supported Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners, including any person who has committed a belligerent act or has directly supported hostilities in aid of such enemy forces. It's just very important that we continue to speak against the NDAA, because as I have just read to you, and I can pass the actual document around. It's a particular administration initiative that allows our United States military to, under the authority of the President, to arrest those who may, and the word belligerent is so vague, the word hostile is so vague, who may be promoting hostility or belligerent acts against our government. However, if our government is out of place, or if there is something that the people are being subjected to that is not agreeable, we have the right to speak out against it. What the NDA does is quell our ability to freely express through the media, through protests, and through any other medium of expression, any checking of the government's abilities. We all understand that this is wrong, and I urge everyone and implore everyone to continue to fight and speak out against documents like the NDAA. Our civil liberties are in jeopardy. We are under the threat of living in a country where oppression has been legalized.
I oppose the NDAA. I think that it is clearly treason against the United States government and the American people. It violates the law of the land, which is rules by which, we all are alleged to operate. The government is alleged to operate. However, as Sir Williams eloquently put it before me, that the Constitution is rendered virtually, or not virtually, it's rendered insignificant and inconsequential in the eyes of the law if the NDAA is the law. This is the law of the land, statutory law passed by Congress and into law by the President of the United States, it can't supersede the basic documents, which is the law of the land. Now, I met years ago with this man named Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bowman, and he was the original director of the Star Wars program, and he was going around the country and talking about how the Constitution is being shredded apart, and it is the duty of people in the armed forces to refuse illegal and unconstitutional orders, as is their oath. Everyone in the government swears an oath to uphold this document, and it is their duty to refuse illegal orders. So I am talking to everyone out there, including people who serve in the military, people who are in so-called law enforcement, to uphold your oath to the Constitution and refuse illegal orders. And I will say further, I am running for sheriff in the city of Richmond, and as I said about incarcerating people for being a victim in the so-called war on drugs, or evicting people on behalf of the banks, the Richmond Sheriff's Department will not incarcerate people for being a victim in the war on drugs. We will not evict people from their homes, and we will not enforce this unconstitutional law. What else is there besides refusal to enforce unconstitutional laws? That is the duty of everybody who swears an oath to uphold this Constitution, and if they don't, they're complicit in treason against this country.
We're here today to talk about the NDAA and about the Citizens United decision, but I'm going to be mainly focusing on the NDAA. I find it kind of funny how the government has a good way of masking these bills with pretty language that's real enticing, like National Defense Authorization, Citizens United. That sounds real good, right? Citizens should be united. If I didn't know what that was about, I'd be all for it. We live in a day where the government's listening in on our smartphones, whether they're on or off, where they're building a database on our physical characteristics, where they have the capability to see everything we've ever put on the internet and study it. I've heard chatter on local news channels about Army combat brigades being trained to deal with civil disturbances here in the U.S. This is before the NDAA ever existed. The NDAA is a bill that is full of flowery language, like protecting the homeland and giving the military the tools that it needs to do its job. But it also does something unprecedented. It gives the president, this one and the next one, the authority to indefinitely imprison people, including United States citizens, without charge or trial. Our senators and congressmen are trying to tear up the last vestiges of the Constitution, all in the name of fighting terrorism. Terrorism is a very clever word. The word used to control all of this. There is no difference really between terrorism and war. So fighting a war on terrorism is kind of like fighting a war on war. The government is using fear to scare us into justifying its tactics. There is one thing and one thing only that protects American citizens, and that's the Constitution. The checks that we put on government power. And in my opinion, when we remove some of the most important checks on government power in the name of fighting terrorism, terrorists have already won. Whenever you suspend due process, you walk down a very dangerous path by giving our government a power that it can wield essentially without restraint. The Constitution states no person, it says no person, not no American citizen, no person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process. And our lawmakers go ahead and pass legislation that denies it. It's got some really fine print in it as well. It has a section that says United States citizens are exempt, but it has another section saying, unless we say so. A few senators even attempted to strip those provisions from the bill while it was on the Senate floor. They failed. In the past, wars ended, or the enemies would cease to be an enemy. Now we have a different dynamic. Now we have this global war on terror that seems to always be expanding, and we're fighting terrorists that we can't necessarily get rid of or eradicate. And this war can seemingly go on forever and continue to strip us of our freedoms and liberties in its name. This country was built on liberty, and if we are going to fight terrorism while destroying liberty in the process, then we're not really accomplishing the goals of defending this country. It was our founders that fought against this. It's why we became an independent nation. It's why we put the Constitution into place. And one thing to think about, to marinate on for a little while, all the mainstream media have congressional correspondents in Congress. Why is this not blasted all over all the news channels? How are we going to feel when we see troops marching in our streets, something no living American has seen since 1876? Hitler had laws saying he could round up people and hold them indefinitely. We had laws here in America once that said black people were not people. Tyrants want to have the law on their side always. So I ask you all today, be it with your lives, labor, or tax dollars, stop investing in your own oppression. Work with your communities to create a better state of living. Do not be content merely to grumble while they are using fear, force, and violence as weapons of oppression. We must embrace the opportunity to resist civilly while we still can. Unquestioning and obedient people will always produce tyrants. Thank you.
Okay.
No way.
NDAA, 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 okay.
No way.
Okay.
No way.
Okay.
No way.
NDAA, 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 okay.
That's a little ironic. It was signed into law by President Obama on New Year's Eve. With his signature for the first time since the Internal Security Act of 1950, our government has codified the power of indefinite detention into law. This law poses one of the greatest threats to our civil liberties in our nation's history. Under Section 1021 of the NDAA, foreign nationals who are alleged to have committed or merely suspected of sympathizing or an affiliate or associate force may be imprisoned without charge or trial until the end of hostilities. The law affirms the executive branch's authority granted under the 2001 authorization for use of military force and broadens the definition and scope of covered persons. Because the war on terror is a war on tactic and not on a state, it has no parameters or timeline. Potentially even demonstrators and protesters, like ourselves, exercising their First Amendment rights can be affected by this law. One popular myth surrounding this law is that it does not pertain to U.S. persons. While the law does not explicitly target U.S. persons, it neither excludes nor protects them. Section 1022 of the law covers U.S. persons. The section allows for open-ended executive judgment with regard to the handling of U.S. citizens. Regardless of whether or not this law is interpreted as applying to U.S. persons, by specifically targeting foreign nationals, the NDAA violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees that all people be treated the same under the law. Therefore, any way you put it, this law is unconstitutional. I'll be quiet from this point. I got a little more, I'll read it.